Right, so the HTS-led administration of Syria, headed by the unelected and self-proclaimed President Ahmed AL Sharaa, better known as Al Jolani, are still failing their own people in typical Al-Qaeda fashion as they commit atrocities against ethnic minorities in their own lands, whilst also engaging in military action with its neighbours. Unless, of course, that neighbour happens to be Israel, in which case they can apparently carry on invading Southern Syria with impunity, even getting away now with having made direct strikes on the Syrian capital of Damascus. It is the recent attacks on Lebanon by these same HTS-led Syrian forces, however, that are once again shining a light on how prepared to take military action the new administration is, as long as it isn't against Israel, whilst highlighting the deepening moral and political crisis in Syria that hypocrisy makes clear. While the Syrian government claims to champion the cause of resistance against foreign aggression, its actions tell a very different story. Instead of confronting the ongoing Israeli invasion of its own territory, Syria has chosen to escalate tensions with Lebanon instead, violating a month-long ceasefire between the two, having spent the last several weeks targeting ethnic minorities themselves in Syria. Will anything shake Syria's resolve to not attack Israel whilst making war seemingly with everyone else, especially as all new Israeli attacks were made in Syria overnight at that? Right, so the clashes between HTS-led Syrian forces and the Lebanese army along the border between the two nations has marked a dangerous escalation in regional tensions between the two states mere weeks after everything had supposedly calmed down. Clashes with Lebanese tribesmen who were accused of assisting in the transfer of smuggled aid from Iran to Hezbollah, having triggered Syria originally. Matters calmed down after the tribespeople agreed to relocate as per agreement with the Lebanese army. But now we have new attacks going on, Syria instigated, though Syria's motivation arguably might be a little bit different this time. These attacks are not merely a response to perceived threats from Lebanon or Iran, they are a calculated attempt by the Syrian government, perhaps, to divert attention away from ongoing domestic failures and to consolidate power. You see, the new administration of Ahmed AL Sharaa has shown a disturbing willingness to use violence as a tool of statescraft. Par for the course for a bunch of Al-Qaeda leftovers as this lot are, you might be thinking, targeting neighbouring countries while ignoring the threat posed by one neighbour in particular who seem to want to make war on everyone right now to keep their own leader in power. Israel, of course. Well, the timing of these attacks is particularly revealing, I thought. Syria, you see, is grappling with a severe economic crisis because HTS came in with no plan, really, except to remove Assad. There's widespread discontent as a result of that, along with the attacks on Alawite and Christian minorities, which have only made matters worse. And that is on top of all the lingering effects of a decades-long civil war that Syria had to deal with, whoever came into power. But rather than addressing these issues, the government has chosen to externalise its problems instead, blaming others a bit. Much like Israel does, in fact. So think about it. And therefore a distraction of a conflict with Lebanon could be seen to be a diversion away from those far more important issues. Sacrificing some regional stability for the sake of political survival. That's exactly what Netanyahu does, isn't it? Well, Lebanon, for its part, has responded to these provocations with remarkable resilience. The Lebanese army has successfully repelled multiple incursions by HTS-led forces. They have inflicted heavy casualties upon them, and they forced the Syrians to retreat, though Syria have made other claims entirely. An excerpt from the Cradle explaining this. It reads, Al-Mayadeen reported early on 17th of March that the Bekaa Valley has been under continuous shelling for 3 hours, with rockets and artillery coming from Syrian territory. The HTS-led Syrian army also launched drones into Lebanese territory in recent hours. Several rockets launched from the Qasr countryside hit the Lebanese border town of Qasr. The shelling is ongoing and civilian casualties have been reported on the Lebanese side, including at least one child. Citing a military source, Al Jazeera reported that 8 members of the Syrian Ministry of Defence were killed in the clashes. The fighting began several hours after 3 HTS fighters were found dead inside Lebanese territory and were handed over to Damascus by Lebanon's armed forces, the LAF, and the Red Cross. The Syrian Defence Ministry's media office told Syrian state media outlet Sana that the Hezbollah militia kidnapped the 3 fighters on the border, took them to Lebanese territory, and executed them on the spot. Other reports say the 3 were already in Lebanese territory when they were killed. Lebanese news outlet Anahar reported on Monday that 2 Lebanese youths were found dead in the Matraba area near the border. They were reportedly kidnapped from their homes inside Lebanon by Syrian security forces and killed. Syrian authorities say they are fighting Hezbollah on the border, despite the Lebanese resistant movement issuing a statement categorically denying its involvement in any of the recent events. Hezbollah are not involved in the fighting with Syria here. They have issued a statement accordingly. It is the Lebanese army fighting HTS, and even the Lebanese army are saying this, but Syria are playing the Hezbollah card, much like Israel constantly do when it comes to Lebanon, a nation they are, of course, still invading as well from the south. The recent attacks on Lebanon also represent a blatant violation of the ceasefire agreement that has been in place for the past month. This ceasefire was brokered with the aim of reducing tensions and fostering dialogue between the two nations. It was an opportunity for both countries to address their differences peacefully, something Al Sharaa has expressed keenness for repeatedly, at least whenever it's Israel, isn't it? However, Syria's decision to breach the agreement underscores its actual disregard for diplomacy and its preference for a military solution in this case, presumably because Israel have issues with Lebanon too. Are you sensing a bit of a pattern here at all? Syrian security forces have been responsible for multiple ceasefire violations, including shelling Lebanese villages and deploying HTS militants to carry out cross-border raids. By choosing to escalate the conflict, Syria has demonstrated that it is little better than Israel in its willingness to violate international agreements and inflict suffering on civilians. The violation of the ceasefire also raises questions about Syria's commitment to regional stability. While the Syrian government frequently condemns Israeli aggression, it never follows this up with any action of its own when they are concerned. Their own actions in Lebanon, however, and indeed against their own people, ethnic minorities, the Christians, the Alawites, suggest a willingness to engage in similar behaviour to Israel to their own ends, making them not just a bunch of terror group cast-offs, but massive hypocrites along with it. The attacks on Lebanon are part of a broader pattern of atrocities committed by the Syrian government and its allies. For example, in Hosh al-Sayed Ali, that's a bit of a mouthful for a place, isn't it? Syrian forces have carried out brutal reprisals against civilians, accusing them of supporting Lebanese resistance groups, and that sadly resulted in 7 people being killed and a further 36 wounded. And this followed a declared ceasefire the day before, showing abject dishonesty on their part on top of everything else. So while Syria is busy attacking Lebanon, though, it continues to turn a blind eye to the ongoing Israeli invasion of its own territory. And given how much Al Sharaa seems to have in common with Netanyahu here, perhaps that is the first unsurprising thing I've actually said in this video. But the latest Israeli airstrikes on the Syrian city of Homs that have been reported today, targeting former military bases and causing significant damage. And yet the Syrian government's response has been absolutely non-existent to it, with no meaningful words taken at all at time of writing, let alone action taken to deter further aggression by Israel. The double standards and the hypocrisy is just nuts. Israel's airstrikes are part of a broader strategy to weaken Syria's military capabilities and assert their dominance across the entire Middle East. By targeting Homs, Israel is sending a clear message that it won't tolerate any challenge to their seeming dominance, even by a state that is acting like a complete pussycat towards them. The Syrian government's failure to respond to these attacks is not just a sign of their weakness, it's a betrayal of the people they purport to represent, who have borne the brunt of Israel's aggression for decades, more Syrian territory having been seized by Israel now, on top of the Golan Heights, which Israel have held since 1967. The contrast between Syria's aggressive posture towards Lebanon and its passive response to Israeli aggression is ridiculous, because they are attacking a state that had left them be despite the regime change, and are ignoring another who are actually actively invading them. While Syrian forces are quick to shell Lebanese villages and deploy HTS militants to them, they are conspicuously absent when it comes to defending their own territory and therefore their own people from Israel. The attacks on Lebanon, the atrocities in places like Hosh al-Sayed Ali, and the ongoing Israeli aggression in Syria point to a Syrian administration that will be out of its depth in a bathtub. It is so desperately wanting to be liked by Israel, yet they're more unprepared than ever to mete out attacks on other neighbouring states and even their own people to exert power over them, showing exactly how much like Israel this Syrian administration actually is. In fact, so much like Israel can they be, so much is Al Sharaa avoiding dealing with Israeli invaders, he's even given them free rein to keep on expanding. Check out the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Anyway, I have to make a little bit of a big announcement today on today's videos, as I got up this morning to find out the channel has now passed the epic milestone of 100,000 subscribers. So I owe each and every one of you a great big thank you to have subscribed and watch on a regular basis, to take in a demo rant or two, and long may it continue. Here's to the next 100,000 subscribers. If you haven't subscribed already, perhaps you will be one of them, and I'll hopefully therefore catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.